Okay, painting. So let's start with the sky. We're going to do a graded wash for this. I managed to have got water over my photo. We want to be, I think, fairly faithful to this colour. I'm just going to use my colour isolator. So it's a slightly greenish blue, fairly light. This is a mid-value around here, so it's kind of, what is that? It's kind of a 7 or an 8 maybe. And we want a fair amount of paint, so I'm going to use my big tin palette. And there's and my big quill brush. You don't have to use a big quill. This is, I think it's a squirrel quill. That's very nice for doing washes and skies and stuff. So let's mix up some colour. Okay, I'm going to have a quick root around for some swatch paper. There we go. And we want it to be fairly close to that. Now, I think that's actually slightly too purpley a blue. I'm going to add in just a smidge too much of lemon yellow just to push that slightly greener. This is cobalt blue, by the way. I want it to be fairly intense colour. And we're going to have to work quickly when we do this. Okay, I'm hoping that won't dry back too pale. Now, let's put you out the way because I need some space. I've got a fair bit on my palette. I'm going to pull it across the paper and then another stripe just slightly overlapping the previous one, and then I'm going to start adding in water so it gets ever so slightly paler every time. I allow myself 2 swishes across just for those bits that I missed. And every time I go across, I've dipped my brush in water. I'm not actually going back to the palette where the colour is anymore. My palette's in the way. And now we're pretty much just water. Let's come back the way. I'm going through the mountains and I'm going through the castle and just putting in a nice, now that is probably one of the best graded washes I've done in a while. Okay, let's mop up the bottom. I'm going to leave everything else and I'm going to let him dry. So I'm just going to pop him onto pause so we can let him dry. Okay, we're back and he's approaching dry. So let's move on. Now, I was thinking we'd do the castle next, but let's put in these background mountain pieces. Now, the furthest piece here is a light blue, fairly similar to what sky is, which isn't surprising, but slightly greyer, slightly more purpley. And then this one is slightly darker and slightly more purpley, and then this one here is kind of got those dark trees, and it's much warmer. It's much yellower and greener. So let's put in this furthest piece. Now it's a fairly light blue, but slightly purpley. I have a tendency to push things too purple for this. So we want it to be quite light but we do want to be able to see the value changes. Right, so a little bit, I'm using a little bit of cobalt to start with. And I'm going to put in, actually maybe I should start with ultramarine. Let's start with ultramarine. And I'm just going to put in a very, very teeny bit of permanent rose, just to send it slightly purple. Now that might be too bright. No. If it is too bright, just a little tickle, very small amount of black will just take the garishness out of that colour. And we're just going to put a very light wash. There's going to be no detail in the background here over this furthest piece of mountain. Okay, and I'm going into the other one. So I have a nice crisp, but then I'm taking a clean brush and just smoothing out that edge. Being careful not to go back into the bit that will show, because this mountain is in front. Okay, right. Now, the piece in front of it, we're going to have to wait for this to dry. It's going to be slightly darker. And let's see what value that is actually. Let's have a look at that. Where's my value scale? Ding, here it is. And what do we think that is? Maybe a 5? Slightly lighter than a 5. 5.5. So that's fairly dark. We might make it slightly lighter. I don't want it to get too punchy too quickly. I'm just stalling for time so it dries. Now, that colour there, yeah, it's a blue. I'm going to make it slightly purpley, but slightly darker than this one. So my ultramarine, a little bit of permanent rose. And I'm using less water this time, so it's going to be darker. Oops, that's too blue. Right, and that's going to be too purple. It's going to be quite bright, that. Yeah, it's too bright. I'm going to put a bit of black in it. And that will grey down the colour, so it's not as intense. Oops. Right. I want it to be slightly darker than the one we already had. Right. Now, it's not quite the same colour. I've made it slightly purpley because I prefer it that way. And we're just going to put an even wash over this. I know there's bits of snow and goodness knows what in this, but it's not the main event, this mountain, so I want it to be subordinate to the castle. And I'm trying to put this on nice and evenly. I'm wondering whether it's dark enough. I'm using the point of my brush where there's a hard edge. I'm going to do this just to make my brush point go where I want it to, keeping the edges crisp where the different layers meet. Now this is Kilimanjaro paper and it stays wet a fair amount of time, which is nice. Okay, alright, now I'm hoping that's going to dry back quite a lot, because then we want to put this one in the front, which is very dark. Okay, I'm going to pause him again. Okay, now he's fairly dry. We're going to leave this very left-hand side bit. I think we're going to start in on this castle. This is where the fun starts. Right, we're going to do some splattering, and we're going to use our spray bottle for texture. We might drop in some colour and all sorts of different things. So, what's the plan? Now, we've got some very dark shadows on this, which is partly why I picked these very dark shadows here. We're not going to put these in right now. What we're going to do is we're going to have a base layer over the whole of the castle with this kind of mottled grey colour. And this grey, let's have a look at him. Alright, he's fairly light there. Yeah, he's kind of a middle, maybe a 6 value in there. So it's kind of around a 6 and a 7 value. So let's mix up a grey that's roughly that. And then we're going to see how we're going to modify it before we put it on the paper. Okay. Now our grey, our go-to grey, is ultramarine and burnt sienna. Mix that up. Now to blue. Right, that's probably still too blue. Right, now that paint I've mixed up there, I can tell immediately is going to be too dark because of the consistency. It's kind of like heavy cream, so if I put that on the paper, yeah, far too dark. Yeah, nothing like that. So let's add in some water to bring the value to what we want it to be. It's about half a brush full. That's another brush full, and now it's kind of moving around the palette like sort of full fat milk. Okay, now that's getting closer, maybe just a little more. Okay, and now I'm going to change the colour. Just check this. So this is what it looks like there. Okay, so this is slightly lighter, but that's fine. Let's change the colour and then do some final tweaks at the end. This is obviously more of a beige, so I'm going to add in some yellow ochre to this, just to swing that colour around a little bit. And that yellow ochre is kind of a mid-value pigment, so I'm going to put in a little water just to offset that. There we go. And we're getting much closer to this. Maybe I'm just going to decant some into that well. A bit more yellow ochre, and because I put a bit of extra pigment in, a bit more water, just to keep the value right. Okay, right, I'm going to go with that. It's going to dry slightly lighter. I made it slightly darker because we're going to put some spray and splashings on it. So we're just going to paint over the whole of this castle, even over the red roofs. We can tint those roofs later. Again, just using my point of my brush against the hard edges, and it's gonna look very dark. I think I could maybe have used a little more yellow ochre, but anyway. Alright, come across. This is where a nice pointy brush comes into its own. There's this wall here. I'm going to use my spray bottle right now. It'll keep it wet, but also you can see it adds in texture. Right, being careful with these edges. If this was going to be a real sort of sploshy, loose painting, we could lose some of these edges. But we're keeping it crisp at the moment. Yeah, I'm going around the outside, and then when I come to the inside, I can just go nuts. Alright, where's this wall? I don't know, hoping this is still going to be wet paper down here. I colour in everything. A little bit of spray. Make it go all sprucey. It's looking dark, but it shouldn't end up dark. Right, I'm now going to wash my brush. Now I know there is grass down here, but I'm just going to soften those edges a little bit. I don't want it too stark, I don't think. I think that horizontal line across there would be a mistake. So a clean brush, just lose some of those. And just mop up a little bit of this water. Don't want hard edges. I'll be putting in hard edges later. Okay, now a little more splashing. We will have to let this dry too, and once that's on, I'm hoping I can still see the drawing underneath there. I'm going to take, now there's some kind of yellowy, greeny, mossy pieces in there. I'm going to just splash in. I think first of all some yellow ochre. There's some paint on the brush and I'm just tapping it with my finger. Whoops, you need to keep it fairly loose in your hand and just kind of pivots around your fingers. Let me just mop that up before. I have to say, when I do this, I don't usually have a palette in one hand. I usually shield it with one hand and then splatter with the other. Yeah, okay. And it won't be looking like much at the moment, and it does look fairly dark. It looks very dark on the screen. It's not as dark in real life. I'm gonna think that's probably, where's my photo? Yeah, we've got these rocks to do. Let's leave the rocks for now. I'm tempted to put in that green, but let's do it piece by piece. So I'm going to let that now. I think there's enough texture in there. There's a bit of colour. Do I want a bit more colour? We're going to glaze over the roofs to give them a bit of red, and then when we put the shadows in, it'll bring the whole thing to life. Right, let's pause this and let him dry. Okay, now he isn't dry yet, but I'm itching to get on, so I'm gonna risk it. Let's put some of this grass in. This colour here. Now it's very tempting to put grass in the green that comes out of tubes, and grass is almost never that colour. So what colour is this? Let's have a look at it. Let's use that isolator. Let's bring this down. Right, yeah, it's I mean, it's a mid-value, pretty much, I think, but it's a very yellowy green. So how are we going to make a yellowy green? Now, what I like to do when we've got these natural greens that are very yellowy is to start with lemon yellow. Then add in a little bit of black, and if you add black to yellow, it makes a beautiful olive green, which is a good start. So here we have, yeah, that olive green. I think we need just a little more yellow in there. I was thinking we needed some more blue, but I don't think we do. Right, now that I think is almost perfect. So let's put in some grass here. I'm actually hoping this is slightly wet still. So we can get a little bit of bleeding. I'm making the edges fairly choppy because we've got these rocks down here. And I'm using the full length of the brush, I'm not using the tip. I'm pulling the full length of the brush across the paper. Now if we want to go back in and do some, put in some extra detail later, we can. I like to get a nice even, fairly natural looking. I'm just putting a couple of hard edges where I can see there's flat rocks. And there's a little bit of grass over here, wasn't there? A little bit of greenery. Alright, and it's looking very flat, which is exactly what I want it to look like at the moment. We haven't even attempted to put in any of these shadows yet, so if it's not looking flat at this point, we won't be able to create this lovely definition between the light side and the shadow side later on. It is tempting to make it look beautiful as you go along. But resist. I'm going to leave that. We probably need a little more in those areas. But I'm happy with that colour. There's a nice bit of texture in there as well. I like it. Alright. Now, let's have a go at this water, I think, is probably the next thing. Now, one thing we do have on here are reflections, but we're going to ignore those to start with and maybe put them in at the end. So, water. Oh, there's this left-hand side. Let's do this left-hand side land bit first. Okay, a little bit of a palette clean. Now, this bit here. This is a kind of a strange colour, I think. That's what he's looking like right now. So there's this very dark bit which we're going to ignore, which you can put in later. So this is kind of a pinkish beige, isn't it? Do we want to put in that colour? Oh, why not? Let's go for it. That's the worst that can happen. Right, now this colour. Now the value of it, it's pretty mid-value actually. Can you see that down there? It's pinkish brown. Oh. But it's not a very bright colour again. Natural colours when you're painting landscapes, they're very, very subtle. Much, much more subtle than the pigments we have in our palettes. Alright, now I'm going to start with some yellow ochre here, because it has got kind of a base of yellow ochre. I'm going to add in just a little bit of permanent rose. Right, and that's going to get me to something kind of like that. Which is okay, but you can see it's too bright. And the thing we do when it's too bright is to add in a little black. Just a little bit of black, and this will take the garishness out of that colour. You see, that's much better. Could be a little light though, I think. Yeah, it's too light. I mean, we can make it darker later, but I'd rather get it right the first time. Okay, let's go with that. I'm tempted later to put in a little bit of the green so it ties everything together. But right now we'll just have a little wash of this. And I have to do this contortion so I can get the point of my brush where I want it. Yeah, I'm thinking that is too bright. Don't like that at all. Really don't like that at all. I tried to make it grayer. I thought it was grayer, but it wasn't. I'm just going to spray that, put a bit of texture on that. And I think probably grey that up a little. So ultramarine and burnt sienna, just to make a grey, to just put some at the bottom. It'll break up this area of wash, and also this is going to be dark up here anyway, but also take some of the punch out. Yeah, that's better. And I think I do want to put in just a little bit of green right now. It's kind of sticking out, saying hello. No, there isn't actually any green. Oh, maybe there's a little bit at the bottom. Right. Okay. Right. Nice. Well, that's that bit done. Still looking flat. There's a little bit of, we've got a little bit of aerial perspective going back here, but not very much. Now we have to do the water. Yikes. Okay, water, water, water. Let me just tidy up my palette a bit. Now, I'm a bit worried about the colours here. I think I've gone too grey on these walls. But anyway, we have to live with it now. We might be able to tweak later. We need to do this. I think that's too purple. Let's do this water. The thing I want to get right with this water is the value. See, it's, if I put this up, it's actually quite a dark value, this water. It's tempting just to do the same as you did in the sky, but it's a different colour, it's a different value, it's a different shape. So, but it will have echo the sky. It's because it's reflecting the light from the sky. Right, now this colour. Let's start with what we had for our sky, which was cobalt. And I'm going to take it a little darker with some black. It's a bit too dark. Right. How does that look? Now that is probably about right. It's not as intense blue as that. But I'm thinking that might be a mistake. And the only thing, it gets slightly lighter down here. These reflections come here and they stand out because it's slightly lighter here. So we need to remember that. Right, now. Let's start with our water. Just going to leave a little sliver of white where it meets the land. I think this is keeping it to be wet. Yes, it is good. Oh, that's no good. There's just a little bit back here that I do want to get in right now. I'm going to use some water now. Take this out of the way. I should be using a bigger brush. I don't think I've ruined it. I thought that was wet enough to go through and it wasn't. Try not to make it look too overworked now. This is what I say to everyone, never do this. Never. Well, yeah. This isn't going to work out, is it? Oh. Anyway. Well, let's carry on. I'm at my usual stage where I think, well, it's ruined now. I can't make it any worse. And sometimes, you can rescue it. Right, let's let that dry and then regroup and replan. Right, I think it's time to have a look at this castle and put some shadows on it. And I've dropped my photograph. Now, we want to make these crisp. They're very dark in the photo. They probably were fairly dark in real life, but not as dark as the photo. But these are the things that are going to give the castle three-dimensionality and also visual interest and visual detail. So, let's start with mixing up a fairly dark grey. So again, it's my ultramarine and my burnt sienna. And making that fairly rich mix. I'm just going to add in a little bit of water. This paint isn't moving around. I do need it to flow. Even though I want it dark, I need it to flow. Right, a little test on a piece of paper. Let's try that. Let's see. Right. I'm going to start on the left and move to the right. And we're going to do the main shadows first. And we need to keep these changes between the light and the dark crisp. No smudging. Right, let's start with this chimney up here. That's a beautiful pointy brush. Actually, she says that it's not pointing very well. Right. Come down. It comes down to the edge of that wall, doesn't it? Trying to keep this. If your drawing was right, you can follow the lines. I'm being a bit of a coward. Right, but still trying to keep it fairly even in here. Now this wall has got a choppy edge. I want to come out to there. So I'm just going to draw a little bit of choppiness on this wall. And there we've got just little gaps. And this is another beautiful line of that shadow. And in the middle, I'm letting the paint do the work. There we go. Now it's a little stark, but it's that kind of painting, so that's what we're going to do. I know there's other shadows over here. I'm going to come back to those. It's a little bit on the side of this chimney pot. And then odd pieces just... What are those? I don't know what they're called. Are they crenellations? They could be crenellations. And there's this piece in here, just under this front entrance. Again, making sure it's vertical. You can have a lot of latitude otherwise, but your verticals need to be vertical. And there's this lovely doorway. And because my initial wash was fairly even though there's texture on there and it's splotchiness, etc., the shadows work beautifully well. There we go, just looking back. Colour is still slightly too grey, but just little bits of detail here. And they're just marks. I'm not doing anything fancy. Like someone said it's a bit paint by numbers, but thank you very much. I'll take that as a compliment. What it is, it's simplification. Putting things in layers, not putting in detail too early. And I'm not quite sure what this is under here. I'm just going to put in a little series of... How far across do they go? They go to that there, don't they? Alright, okay. Which I'm tempted to put in this. The size of these chimneys up here go a long way to defining this roof. And they also provide a bit of connection to the sky, which is nice. It's very handy to have a pointy brush for this. Is that right? Oh, I think, well, I've done it now. See, I'm tempted to come and put in these. There's a little bit of shadow underneath this roof, but I'm not doing I'm doing a broken line. And then just a couple of little dots for these windows. I'm not doing squares at all. There we go. Anything else? There's some other windowy bits here. I don't want to put in too much, I have to say. I'm just going to stand back and see what that looks like. Yeah, well, it's getting better, isn't it? It's not a complete disaster like I thought it was a while ago. Let's do this big shadow over here. This is another, I mean, this shadow and this shadow are very important. So just a little bit of sliver of light in there. Also, there's these little slivers. We could come back afterwards and do these with a little opaque white, but Let's see if we can paint around them. And I think it always looks better if you can paint them rather than doll off on white afterwards. Similarly with masking fluid, if you can paint around them, do. Now I don't want to start painting into things that shouldn't be painted into. Right, that's the side of this. Down and across. I don't know about that. Could all be going wrong. Oh dear, my brush is splitting. It's a new one too. Right, I just want to get the edges of this done so I don't paint into things I shouldn't be painting into. Right, that comes down to the wall there. Right, and there's some little, no, I think I painted over those. Oh well, never mind. Okay, my paint's drying on the palette and a little more water. A little bit of jiggliness. Like so. Alright. How's that looking? Let's just put in, there's just a little bit of, brush would point a bit more, there we go. And I'm just putting in little black marks where I see them. And I'm hoping this will make it read. A little shadow under that roof. A little bit of shadow under there. So there'll be a little bit of subtle texture put on afterwards, right? Because there are, I mean, there's this. These are round and there's obviously a little bit of value change there, but not a huge amount. Right, let's stand back and have a look. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, yeah, it's okay. It's not one of my best, let's put it that way. Oh well. Right, now let's have a look at these rocks. It's really quite dark down here near the shoreline. So let's put those in. Let's do some darks over there as well. Right, I'm going to go back to my grey and maybe just green it up a little. So a little bit of blue, a little bit of yellow. I just risk a bit of black in there. leave that fairly wet down there. I'm just putting in marks where I can see that the values are dark. I'm going to go back in. I'm hoping this is going to still be wet and soften some edges. So that can flow a little. As I'm softening, I'm cleaning my brush quite a lot. Still a little bit just to bring that down into the water slightly. Alright, well, I don't like that purple mountain. Whatever possessed me to do a purple mountain? Right, let's do a similar thing for this shoreline here. Right, now dark, ultramarine, and burnt sienna. I'm gonna make that slightly blue, I think. Bit of water so it flows, and I'm hoping this will stay pretty dark. Pretty wet down here. I'm going to use another brush for the softening. There's a fair amount of water on my brush for this softening. We need some more colour in there, but I just want to get that dark down by the shoreline in. A little dull, that colour, isn't it? I think I've greyed things up too much. Yeah, I don't know. You live and learn. Just gonna let that bleed down slightly. We're not actually doing the real reflections yet. I just want to have that shoreline bleeding into the water, just to give it a bit of smoothiness. Alright. I'm just noodling with this. I think that's improved it a bit, hasn't it? I still don't like the colour. We need more colour on it. But I'll have to wait for a bit. This is all now incredibly wet. And just putting little bits of dark in. I think my grass was a little too choppy. It's too wet to work with yet. Okay, I'm trying to do things I can't do because the paper's not dry. Right. Now, I'm going to risk a little bit of colour in there. Because there is some colour, isn't there? Soften that. Don't really want to have these read as anything. Just want them in as marks. Okay, I think I might need to just leave that there for a while. Yeah, I mean it's looking better, isn't it? That terrible purple mountain, what the hell am I going to do with that? Whose idea was it to do a purple mountain? Right, okay, I'm going to pause and let that dry and then we can come back and do some reflections, deal with that mountain, probably a bit more colour on the walls, and maybe then call it a day. Right, okay, well, these are going on pause. Right, let's see if we can now pull this together a bit. I need to put a little bit of colour in there. Try not to make it too purple this time. Slightly purple. Okay, right, let's have a go at these reflections. I hate doing reflections. Right, now we're just going to start with some clean water and a fairly big brush. Actually, a square brush, flat brush is maybe good for this. So let me just wet him. I'm putting the reflections will come straight down. So I'm putting some water on. Might need a bit more. Let's mix up some colour. Fairly dark, aren't they? So I'm going to start with a grey. dark kind of blue. Right, see what this will do. The main one is where this shadow is. Pulling it straight down, leaving a few gaps here and there. Bit of darkness just at the top. Bit of different colour. This edge. And then slightly lighter. Drop some colour in where I can see it. If it's still wet, it should fall down nicely. A little more dark. Isn't the best brush for mixing, I have to say. Too much brown on there now. Clean that brush. Some water. Slightly more over here. Can't really see. All right, I think that's probably, I'm not going to futz with that anymore. What I am going to do though is take my square brush. I'm hoping this has got a sharp enough edge to it. Just pull some horizontals through it. Just to make it look like there's some ripples in the water. Don't want to overdo this. You can't actually, there's not really much of this on here. Stand back. Look at those. It's kind of stripy. Dried. Okay. They have to come down vertically, otherwise they don't work. Okay. Right. Okay. Now, Let's tighten this whole thing up a bit. My sky probably should have been a little punchier, but I'm not gonna play with that right now. There's this little blossom here which I actually quite like. Let's go back to the pointy brush and just put some very subtle shadows on here. It's still quite flat. We've got the underwash and then the shadows, but there are some subtle value changes that I do want to just indicate. I've got to be careful with this, I don't destroy the form. Just drop in a little bit just to give it a bit of variation. And this wall here is darker. A little wash over that. Just fade that out as it comes across. Soften that edge a little. Then it goes darker as it goes around this corner. There are some little sparkles at the top, which I'll try and leave. Just a little bit of dark at the bottom. Goes slightly darker at the bottom. Can't see what's going on back there. A bit of colour on him. And this has a little bit colour just to bring out that front piece. Very subtle changes. This now up here. There's a little bit of colour on these. There's this roof which is turning away from the light. And this is slightly darker down here. It's very little colour going on here. And we're building on our initial wash which had all the texture in it. So we can make it look like stone. A little bit of colour here. Just to bring that front piece out a little. And I did say we should put some maybe a little too subtle in that colour, but it is what it is now. It's a bit more here. Just little bits of detail. These are just marks right now. I think I'm just going to slightly, it's a very small amount, it's kind of burnt sienna, orangey red, just to put a bit of colour on those roofs. very subtle changes there. Dum, dum, dum. A little more shadow under there, possibly. And there's a bit of shadow down here. It's easy to start overdoing it at this point because a few marks makes a big difference, but a lot of marks will make everything look the same again. Darken that roof up a little. And if I have some, pick up a little bit of dark. The sides of these pieces actually have not being particularly accurate here. I'm just putting in a few things. There are some. Put one in there. Little bits in there. And a bit of shadow underneath these. Okay. I think this probably needs a little beefing. Right, now I think we're getting close. That wretched purple mountain. What am I going to do with that? The thing is, if I glaze over it, it's going to make it darker. Which I don't really want it to be darker. But I also don't want it to be purple. Let's see, so this is kind of a brownish grey I'm putting on here. I'm going to try and put something on this that will give it a bit of interest back there. There is some detail in there, but also I'm hoping the brown will take punch out of this colour so it's not screaming for attention all the time. I'm just going to go in and it's a clean damp brush, just smooshing those marks together so there aren't any hard edges. I'm hoping that will improve things. So I'll take a little bit of the punch of that white line out. Okay, did that help? Yes, I think that did help, didn't it? Yes, that helped actually, that helped quite a lot. Now, I think there's a few too many white pieces here. I don't like them. So I just want to put some colour on, just to take out those white pieces. Now, maybe some more green. Just want to take them out. I could go in and start drawing rocks, but I don't think I will. pieces here. They're just, I feel these white pieces they're just drawing the eye too much. And then again, a clean brush, just taking out some of those hard edges. Bit of extra colour in there. Right, we're very close now. But there's still a bit too much. Yeah. Oh, fell over. And I mean, I could actually leave it right now. I think this water's a bit of a travesty still, but I think there should be a bit more down there. So I'm going to put in this dark side of the rock here. A little bit. Hoping this won't draw the eye too much. No, I don't think it will. I think it's okay. It's okay. I don't like that little piece of light in there. Right, just softening a couple of edges. Oh, I think they're just too much. I am going to put in a bit more dark on that side of the reflection because I think it needs it. I think I'm just going to didn't have any water on that side. See, I'm not looking at the reference photo anymore. I'm looking at the painting. I'm seeing what the painting needs rather than anything else. I'm going to cover up my right. I think that might make the whole thing terrible if yeah. Okay. I think I'm going to leave it there. Just try and put in those horizontal pieces again. Okay, there we go. Well, as always, it was a bit touch and go, but I think it just about came together in the end. Wow. Okay, well, thanks for watching, if you're watching. It was fun to do, and a lot of problem solving as usual, and I'll see you next time.